Welcome back. It is TRE Talk Radio, your voice in Spain. Heading over now to the UK, and we're going to chat to Jim Lee about his new book, Life in B&W. Good afternoon, Jim. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks so much. Very good.
I nearly said earlier, life in a BMW, and that would have been a completely different story.
Yeah, BMW equaling black and white in the industry.
Yes. Now, it's a fascinating book, it really is, and I really don't know where to start because you've got so much in your life, so maybe we'll start at the beginning when you were born in the UK, is that right?
That's correct, and very soon after went off to live in Trinidad with my family. We went over there when I was 4 and spent about 3 years. My father was head of security in the Central and South America basin there.
Now, if you don't mind me saying, you say, you're quite open about this, that you have dyslexia, and you're not a great reader of books, of course, which I'm not either. I find it very difficult to read books and keep interested in it. So coming to actually write a book like this about your life must have been quite an interesting challenge for you.
It was, but I was spurred on by a producer friend who wanted to make a film about a certain part of it, the part in Australia. So I was asked to give backstory, and he said the best way to do this would be to write the full memoir, as it were, and then he could then, look at the complete story and then perhaps piece together a good way of, creating the beginning of the story.
So it's never going to be in chronological order, then?
No. No.
Which is like any good film. When it's a lot of the new films, anyway, at least that I watch, you kind of start off at a real poignant part of the story, and then it goes back 3 years and then starts building up to that. So
sometimes it starts at the end and goes back to the beginning, which, I think that's what's exciting about film, is it allows people to be laid threads of things which, allow you to imagine, and therefore, not have it in a monosyllabic way from A to Z. Otherwise, it just becomes predictable, like a chronological story, which films, I think, then aren't as exciting.
Now, of course, people know you for your photography, but your life could be a film in its own right. It really could. Some of the stuff you've been through and experienced in your life, the ups and the downs, and some of them were quite seemingly a long way down. It could actually be a film in its own right.
Well, it possibly could be a bit long. It might go on for a while. And also, I don't see my own life really as being something that the public really want, but I think there are aspects of it which, are interesting, and I think, it's a bit hard to know what to focus on that would be specifically interesting. But I think, the most important thing about why I wrote it, and what I think is probably the most interesting in a commercial sense from a film point of view, would be the journey in Australia.
And I think whenever I interview people on this show, and it can be about fascinating topics, and we can talk about photography in a moment in the career, but I think most people are interested in the human story there, and I think that comes across well in your book.
Yeah, I think that we did work on the Australian side. Sorry to bash on about the Australian side, but it has been worked on before, and we didn't quite get to where we wanted, so we went back a bit to sort of write the complete biography to get to the bones of why this chap in the story had this particular journey. And I think it's important to understand the emotional side of anything. And I believe that people want, a sort of, to be able to identify, let's say, with the person in the story. I'm a great believer of rather than more old-fashioned tradition of a story with the beginning and middle and end, rather than just, I'm not into kind of Rambo films or cartoon films personally. They don't really appeal to me, but I do like a real good heartfelt story, and I think this is a journey which, if one understands and grips the character in it, perhaps it's interesting. Hopefully.
Too right. I agree fully with you on that one. Now, just some of the interesting points that we pick up in the story is the fact that your mum and dad that worked at MI5, your dad was a spy, you say. That's not your average upbringing, is it?
It isn't, actually. He wasn't a spy as such. It's been cited the story. He worked in the MI5, which is the spy business. So he worked in the spy business. In fact, he was the DG, which is the man who runs the spy business. He was his PA and had very close privy to a lot of things that were going on at the very sharp end. And he worked in the nerve center. And mainly what he did was interrogate. That was one of his big jobs. So he interrogated Nazis during the war. He joined the MI5 in 1940, I think it was. And he interrogated Nazis during the war. And he then later interrogated communists in the Cold War period. So that was a large part of his job.
That's slightly different to me because my dad worked, at a furniture shop. So it's just, did you understand that at the time, I suppose you had nothing else to compare it to? I suppose it was just the normal life for you.
I didn't know anything about it until later, when obviously it was very revealing when I found out. But I was 20 when I found out what he did, and until then I hadn't a clue. So I lived in this kind of rather strange world of what may be secrecy. I think we had a very sheltered life because my father, was obviously very much in the foreground of that industry and therefore couldn't, go public with it. He had to keep very much in the background. So we lived a very sheltered life. So.
And you moved to Australia quite a young age, and I suppose how much would you say Australia plays a part in your life as far as the development of you?
Oh, massively. I mean, basically, I went to Australia because I was such a failure academically with my dyslexia and sight dyspraxia that I couldn't cope with the academic world. So my father had been to Eton, Cambridge, and on into MI5, and he wanted me to do the same, but there was no way I could do any of that. I couldn't manage it at all, so I spent most of the time looking out the window in school classrooms thinking, I can't wait to get out of here. So eventually, as I came out of school with at 16, which was having got no qualification whatsoever, I just looked in an ad in a paper saying, there's a little Big Brother movement, which is the sort of little version of the £10 POM that went off to Australia on a migration scheme. This was in 1963. So I applied for that. It was only £10 to get a ticket. You get out, they had to stay for 2 years. So I thought, great, I'll do that. And I sort of had this vision. I picked up a pamphlet on Australia and the outback, and it was sort of ranchers looking like cowboys, on horses and things. So I thought, great, I could be a cowboy in Australia. That would be brilliant. So I, just signed up, and when I got on the boat, I suddenly realized I was actually in the hands of basically a series of Dr. Barnardo's children, who were orphans from up north. And it was a very rough and very unusual beginning for me because I came from a very privileged family and background, so I went straight to the deep end from 17, and then, gradually, when I got to Australia, I kind of sorted things out and got myself on and upwards. But
Jim, it's fascinating because my wife works as a teacher here in Spain in an international school. We were just talking the other day about the fact that in their school there's a special staff member who is absolutely dedicated to informing other teachers of any special needs that there are in the classroom as far as dyslexia and so on. And now you can really incorporate that into the way in which you bring a lesson and be aware of any exterior needs that that are there. In those days that wouldn't have been the case for you, and I suppose you would have been having all different kinds of feelings going through your head as to why you're not as academically there as maybe your father and your mother were.
Well, nobody knew what dyslexia was in those days. There wasn't even in the dictionary the word dyslexia, and dyspraxia has only been there very recently. So, nobody knew. I went to a school finally. I went from my prep school, which I quite enjoyed, on to a crammer, which I hated, to try and get into the sort of the throes of, they thought I was just being lazy. So then I went on to this other school, which was complete, like a free school or a different school for those children that the sort of slogan was children who are bright but not academic. And of course it turned out to be a school for dyslexics when they understood what the word and the thing was, and they gave it a word. So in my day they just didn't know what we were. We just thought it was something about you which actually okay but not okay. And so they were discovering the answer and the reason for this situation. So nowadays it's quite different. They can identify this very early and help people with dyslexia, and I think they wake up the sort of the lazy brain cells with a laser actually through the eyes and things like that. All sorts of ways of encouraging and caring for those that suffer from it. But in our day, we just had to kind of find another way to do something else which we could do well.
And did you feel the pressure on you because you were doing something differently to the way in which your mum and dad maybe would have anticipated or wanted, and almost like in most of our lives, I mean, we kind of go the way in which our parents do, kind of on a general basis.
Well, I felt an absolute failure because I thought, I'm not doing anything right, and I didn't want to be a failure, but I just couldn't cope. So nobody really knew why I couldn't cope, and nor did I. So in the end, I just thought, well, I'll bugger off as far away as I can and just make up a new life somewhere else. So I went off to Australia to be a cowboy, which wasn't quite the right country to go to, but it was interesting, and it was a wonderful journey. So I just went off to Australia with the sort of wing and the prayer and thought, well, I'll see what happens. I can't stay here. I've got nothing to stay here for. I could never get a job as anything because I hadn't got any qualifications.
I've got to take my hat off to you because that's just doing something, quite out there, isn't it? I mean, I went to live in America. It didn't quite work out, but I was going to go. I moved there for a few months, and I came back to the UK eventually. But just getting out there and doing something like that, it takes a lot of balls, doesn't it?
It does. It does.
For want of a better term.
It tests your metal. I mean, either you cope or you don't. So, yeah, I think.
Yeah, and was that a problem? Was that a breakdown in the relationship with your mum and dad because of this, or did they come to terms with it?
No, I mean, I just had to say to them, I kept getting sort of instructions from my father through air letters, sent in the airmail letters, saying do this and do that, and they told me that Lieutenant, Colonel FFC Spry or someone, the head of MI5 in Australia, was there for me if I needed him. And I didn't understand any of it. It didn't actually make any sense. I just said, "Oh, bugger off, Dad. Let me get to my own job. I'm going to do my own thing here." I just ignored all this. And, one day when I saw a pawn shop and I went in and I saw the saddle for sale and I got the saddle and put it on my shoulder and wandered off and hitched a ride into the outback. And that was the beginning of a lovely journey through the outback with an Aboriginal in a truck, and he sort of kind of showed me and allowed me to exorcise my actual fantasies, my dreams, my childhood dreams, and it was a wonderful process of kind of fatherly influence, but from a very primitive man, which was a very, very valuable experience, and it's never left me.
Isn't it amazing that you find that in probably one of the most unexpected places, I suppose? Yeah,
exactly, yeah.
And how then do you kind of move from this cowboy in Australia to working in photography? I mean, you got to say it's a colourful life you've had.
Yeah, well, I went out to Bob, and the Aboriginal sort of said, "Okay, son, let's just, let's try being cowboys in this country." He said, "I'll go back and we'll see my family as we're going through the outback." He pulled over and I met some of his family and some friends, and he gave me a 2-year-old Brumby, a really kind of a skitty horse, and I popped the saddle on it, got on it, fell off, got on it again, fell off again, got on it again, and just gradually trotted around. And eventually I managed to stay on for a little bit and sort of rode up and down, and then I got cheered for having succeeded and achieved and everything, and then I got off and got back in the truck and drove to the other side of the London plane to Perth, and I realised I'd left my saddle behind. I mean, it was a childhood dream that was somehow exorcised and dealt with, and I had completely forgotten. I got over the whole idea of wanting to be a cowboy, and I then came back to Sydney eventually, and I bumped into this English guy who was also a photographer, who had been there for about 6 months before me, and we talked about photography, and I was luckily able to rent a room from a guy who was a photographer who said, "Look, you can have free rent if you print my pictures at night." So I did that, and I got into it that way.
Because photography wasn't as accessible, I suppose, as it is today. But for you, was that always there, or was that something that you kind of...
No, it wasn't. It sort of developed out of wanting to do something visual, and I went to art school in England for a short period after failing at school. And, but my hand was so heavy in painting and drawing. I loved the idea of it, but I wasn't capable of doing it very well. So I just sort of, I realized that this was going to be a hopeless ride. I'm not going to be a painter, as much as I'd like to be. So I then was searching around for something else, and I saw a couple of wonderful movies that I wanted to, that really appealed to me, and it made me want to be a director of films, making of films, and photography seemed a good way into it because it was sort of part of the process of making films, understanding photography and composition and light and shade and, stories and content. So I then went off on this journey taking pictures to try and attract, anybody who might make films, that I might be one of those, people that's eligible eventually when I learned more about it.
I mean, you were taking pictures of some bands that you may have heard of, like the Rolling Stones and Beatles, and just a few of the well-known ones there. And that must have been quite an experience in its own right.
It was. I mean, one of my first commissions, actually, for a pop group was the Stones, and they came out to Australia in 1964. So did the Beatles. Actually, I filmed and photographed them both. But the Stones, I was allowed to go into their caravan on my own because I looked a bit like a Rolling Stone. I had long hair and shag. I had a good accent, and I had my cameras. They said, "Okay, you go on in." So I went in, and I was locked in the caravan for 40 minutes with the Stones, and actually I was so delighted I got in there, but then I completely was fazed by the fact that here I was with this group who were completely amazing, and they were sort of shouting and spitting and swearing and just behaving really badly. And of course my upbringing was not like that. I was sort of sweating behind the camera, looking, and I spent the first 15, 20 minutes I kept clicking, but I hadn't even put a film in the camera. I had to go back and put the film in, then I forgot to set the aperture to get the right exposure. In the last sort of 5 or 10 minutes I got a couple of frames before I left. And I thought, well, I got something, but I spent most of the time sweating and panicking behind the camera. I then walked out of the caravan, and I was absolutely mobbed by loads of girls. I thought, what's going on?
Not a bad life, this.
Because I'd been in the caravan with the guys, and I suppose they thought I had something to do with that. Anybody who looked like a pop star, an English pop star,
and I'm
was
sure.
mobbed.
Did you use your English accent there a little bit as well, no doubt?
Well, I couldn't help it, really. It just came out anyway, but, it was very funny. So I kind of was a bit embarrassed by that. Anyway, so that was the beginning. And then I got my first picture in Vogue Australia by complete chance. One of the girls I went out with was a Vogue model, and I got one picture there. So when I came back to England, I thought, well, I work for English Vogue.
Yeah.
That took 10 years. To work for English Vogue is much more serious and harder to get into.
So, I mean, you're working with fashion and with different fashion houses even. Would they hire you, or would you purely be working for a magazine?
Well, no, I'd work for magazines. Then I would try and get advertising shots, but I was on a kind of very bent journey of doing interesting pictures, quirky pictures with content. I wanted to include other things in the pictures other than just, photographing clothes. So I kind of went on my own journey of discovery in terms of political, social comment, topical comment in my photographs to try and lay some interest and ambiguity and something for people to look at and question. And I thought this would be a good way to sort of make sort of snippets of almost film clips, which would then perhaps help me towards, becoming a filmmaker eventually. So it was all on the journey for trying to end up making films.
Do you still get amazed at the power of a photo, a video even? I'm just thinking recently of this photo of this refugee, this 3-year-old that was, and how that's really kind of galvanised a lot of action. And we all remember photos of Tiananmen Square in the 80s. Those political photos that tell us so much a story, they're so powerful, aren't they?
They certainly are. I mean, one's got to be careful, I think, that one doesn't, there's a wrong side of the fence. I mean, in the case of that little boy, I think that 3-year-old boy you're talking about, that came, one of the migrant children was found washed up on the beach. I mean, I already spoke about that, actually, but I felt it was right. And I thought it was fascinating that a woman actually took that picture, which you would imagine, would have been harder for her to take than a man, but even I would have found it very difficult to photograph that.
Yeah.
Having lost a child myself, I know what it feels like to be in that situation, so I would be very wary. But then on the other hand, I think it's right that people should know what's going on, and sometimes a shocking picture like that is very revealing, and therefore I think it is important probably to show anyway. So I admire the woman who took it. You
just mentioned it. I wasn't really going to have the time to go in, but I just wanted to ask you about, because obviously your book's very candid, and you talk about some of the dark moments, and for you, the loss of your child. I became a father 3 years ago, and I've got another one on the way. Yeah. I don't know what I would be like, if I'm honest with you, Jim. I just do not know what I would be like.
Well, you have to go on. There's nothing you can do. You just got to stand up to it and accept it for what it is, and find a way to come to terms with what you feel about it, and think perhaps what that child will want you to be like too. They wouldn't want you to go backwards or upside down, and all the rest of it. They want you to go forward, and also I think, you're going to go on living, and you don't want to go on living in a world which is going to be punishing and hard for you. So you just try and get a grip of what, get things into perspective a little bit. And I used to use that period in time. I designated a period of time in a day to go and analyze, what it felt like to be in the situation that I felt so punished by the fact I lost my son. Yeah. That I'd allocate it to a designated amount of time, like 30 minutes in a day, and then the rest of the day, the next 24 hours, I wouldn't go anywhere near it. If it rose up in my mind and my heart, I'd say, not now, I'll do it tomorrow in my half-an-hour patch. And I would go back and go there every day for that religious, concentrated time of thinking about Orlando, my son, and how to deal with it. And it was a way of decompartmentalizing the agony of having this on a repetitious time, 24/7. You know, it just, you can't deal with things like that. They just become too, you know, you wake up, you go to sleep, the whole of your life is just upside down. So I find it very important to be logical and practical, and it sounds rather heartless, but actually it's not. You know, you get much more value and use out of a concentrated period of time where you do nothing else but study that and analyze it and come to terms with it, and then you don't let yourself get distracted in between.
I wish I could learn that art myself. I really do, Jim. Because time's against us, I just want to quickly just say, look, the book's available, and there's far more, you delve into it far more than we could possibly do in a radio interview, and so it's called Life in B and W, B and W. But I just wanted to
black and white,
yeah, black and white, Jim. I just wanted to ask you the way in which now photography is on an iPhone. It's you know, people are taking photos now, very, very popular, of course. Is that watering down photography, or actually is that opening up to people who may never would have considered it before?
I think it's actually quite a good thing. I mean, photographs, to me anyway, aren't about technicalities necessarily, or about whether you can use the camera, then stand exposure. I mean, cameras are taking pictures, and if you can get a good picture, you know, in a camera film, why not? I've seen some brilliant pictures by people who don't know anything about how to technically work in a manual technical cameras, but they've just got an eye, or they have a feeling for something, or they've got a, you know, genre they want to work on, and shoot anything you like. I mean, you just shoot yourself. I get great pleasure out of shooting this on my iPhone.
Does it not annoy you, though? I mean, the other day I was walking, and it rained for the first time about 6 months in Spain here, and I just decided to take a photo of a busy street with the rain, and actually it caused the lights of the shop to kind of reflect in the rain on the street there. Yeah. And just a quick photo on my iPhone, never even get, just to say, put it on Facebook, say, look at what it's raining. And I had about 3 or 4 people saying, great photo, can I paint that? And it was just, does that not annoy you, as somebody with all the great equipment that you have? And suddenly some guy like me walks along and points a phone at it.
Not at all, no. More the merrier. You know, more competition the better. You know, one can't be protective about what you do. I mean, I you know, it's what you got to say. I mean, because I like to take pictures which have content, which have meaning, have thought. Now, you know, anybody can have that. If you got it, you got it. And if you want to record it in a picture, then do it. Now, I wouldn't put any more. I don't have any sort of professional kind of hang-ups with people doing things like that. Just take pictures on whatever you can, you know, even on a pin camera, you know, it doesn't matter, whatever.
Jim Lee, thank you for joining us here on Talk Radio. The book, as I say, there's so much more to delve into, so do get a hold of the book on Amazon here in Spain, of course. And Jim, really delighted. I'm sorry we didn't get to other stuff we could be talking about in your career, but I think we've had a blast, so I really appreciate your time with us here. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Bless you, Jim. Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
This is Talk Radio Europe, your voice in Spain.